Every tiny home you've scrolled past on YouTube follows the exact same layout. Loft at one end, kitchen and bathroom lined up along one wall, a narrow hallway running down the other side to get you from the front door to the bed. It's the layout on the Pinterest boards, the layout in the builder catalogs, the layout your neighbor built last summer. And structural engineers who actually work on tiny homes on wheels will tell you, off the record, that it's wrong. Not wrong because it looks bad. Wrong because of where the weight sits. Wrong because of what happens to that structure at highway speed. And wrong because of how much of your 320 square feet you're quietly throwing away every single day you live in it. Today I'm breaking down exactly why the standard tiny home floor plan fails the moment you look at it through an engineer's eyes, and what the layout should actually look like instead. By the end of this video, you're going to look at every tiny home listing differently, and if you're mid-build right now, this might be the video that saves your trailer. Welcome back if you're already here, and if you're new, this channel breaks down tiny home design and construction with real numbers, not just pretty photos. Hit subscribe now, because the layout mistake we cover in Reason 3 is the one almost nobody catches before they've already poured the money into it. Before we get into the 4 reasons, here's the number that matters. A typical tiny home on wheels, fully built, lands somewhere between 10,000 and 13,000 pounds on a dual-axle trailer. That weight isn't supposed to sit wherever the floor plan happens to put it. It's supposed to sit within a very specific window relative to the axles. And almost nobody designing these homes for the first time understands that the interior layout and the trailer engineering are the same decision. Let's get into it. Reason 1. The standard layout ignores tongue weight, and tongue weight is not optional. Here's the part nobody explains before you start sketching your dream kitchen. A travel trailer and a tiny home on wheels is a travel trailer, whether you like the term or not, needs somewhere between 10 and 15% of its total loaded weight sitting on the hitch. That's called tongue weight, and it's what keeps the trailer tracking straight behind your tow vehicle instead of fishtailing. The standard tiny home layout puts the kitchen, which is the heaviest fixed component in the house between the appliances, the cabinetry, and the water lines, wherever it looks best in the render. Sometimes that's at the tongue end, which is fine. But just as often, in the layouts that prioritize a big farmhouse sink under a window at the back, the heaviest cluster of weight ends up sitting behind the axle instead of in front of it. When that happens, tongue weight drops below that 10% threshold and sometimes goes negative, meaning the trailer is actually pushing up on the hitch instead of down. Engineers call this a low or negative tongue weight condition, and the practical result is trailer sway. At highway speed, a tiny home with poor weight distribution can start oscillating side to side, and once that oscillation starts, it tends to get worse, not better. This isn't a rare internet horror story. It's a documented, physics-based failure mode that shows up specifically when a home's mass is centered in the wrong place relative to the axle. The fix is not complicated once you know to look for it. Heavy fixed elements, the kitchen, the water heater, the bathroom if it has a full tub, need to sit forward, ahead of, or directly over the axle. Light elements, the loft, the closet, secondary storage can sit toward the rear. Most builders design the layout for how the kitchen photographs. Engineers design it for where the weight lands. Reason 2. The single-loaded hallway is dead weight you're paying for twice. Walk through almost any standard tiny home, and you'll notice the same circulation pattern. Front door, hallway running along one side, rooms peeling off that hallway one at a time until you reach the loft ladder at the back. It's borrowed directly from RV design, and RV design was never optimized for how much you actually pay per square foot in a permanent or semi-permanent tiny home. Here's the actual cost of that hallway. In a 320 square foot tiny home, a hallway roughly 30 inches wide running the length of the trailer eats somewhere between 25 and 40 square feet, depending on the build. That's 8 to 12% of your entire livable footprint spent exclusively on getting from one end of the house to the other. It contributes 0 storage, 0 seating, 0 function beyond circulation. In a 2,500 square foot house, losing 10% of your floor plan to hallways is an inconvenience. In a home where every square foot costs you somewhere between $200 and $400 fully finished, that same 10% is $2,000 to $4,000 spent on a corridor. Structural engineers and space planners who work on small footprint housing consistently flag single-loaded corridor plans as the least efficient circulation pattern available for anything under 500 square feet. precisely because the ratio of hallway to livable space gets worse, not better, as the total footprint shrinks. The alternative is a double-loaded or open-flow plan, where the walkway through the home does double duty as the kitchen aisle, or where rooms open directly off a shared central zone instead of a dedicated corridor. You lose the privacy of a hallway. You gain back a room's worth of usable floor. Reason 3, and this is the mistake I promised you at the top of this video, the one that catches first-time builders who've done everything else right. The sleeping loft in a standard tiny home almost always sits over the trailer tongue, at the front of the home, above the hitch. It's an intuitive choice. Builders want the tallest ceiling height for the main living space at the rear, so the loft gets pushed forward. The problem is that the tongue end of the trailer is structurally the worst possible place to stack additional weight. The tongue is a cantilever. It extends forward of the axle with nothing underneath it but the hitch connection. Every pound you add above the tongue, a mattress, 2 adults, nightstands, storage bins, increases the leverage working against that cantilever every time the trailer hits a pothole, a speed bump, or an uneven grade. Combine a loft positioned over the tongue with a kitchen or bathroom also concentrated near the front, and you've built a home where the heaviest, highest, most leverage-sensitive load sits in exactly the spot an engineer would tell you to avoid. There's a second problem layered on top of the structural one, and it's a comfort problem. Heat rises, and in most standard layouts, the loft sits farthest from the primary living space's ventilation and closest to the lowest ceiling height in the house, which means the loft is simultaneously the hottest zone in summer and the most leverage-loaded zone on the road. Owners report loft temperatures running 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the main floor in poorly ventilated builds, specifically because the loft sits in the dead air pocket at the tongue end, away from the ridge vent or gable window that would actually move that heat out. The engineered fix repositions the loft directly over or just behind the axle, the most structurally stable zone on the entire trailer, and pulls ventilation, typically a gable end window or a ridge vent, toward that same zone rather than centering it over the main living area alone. It's a small shift on paper. It changes the entire weight and comfort profile of the home. Reason 4. The rectangular box with 4 hard corners is fighting the chassis underneath it, not working with it. A steel trailer frame flexes. Not much, but measurably, every time the tiny home goes down the road, especially over uneven pavement or gravel. Torsional flex, the frame twisting slightly along its length, is a normal and expected part of towing anything over a multi-axle trailer. A conventional stick-framed rectangular box built rigidly on top of that flexing chassis has nowhere for that movement to go, and it shows up over time as hairline cracks at the corners of windows, doors, and where interior walls meet the subfloor. It's one of the most common warranty issues reported by tiny home builders working with owners who log real highway miles rather than moving the home once and parking it permanently. Engineers who understand chassis dynamics generally recommend one of 2 corrections. Either the home is built with a floating floor system that decouples the wall framing from direct rigid contact with chassis flex points, or the layout itself avoids placing large uninterrupted glass or heavy fixed cabinetry directly at the corners, where flex stress concentrates hardest. The standard tiny home layout, chasing maximum window area at the front gable end for that Instagram-ready natural light shot, puts glass in exactly the highest stress zone on the entire structure. None of these 4 problems mean the tiny home movement is broken. They mean the version of it that gets photographed and templated across builder websites was optimized for how a floor plan looks in a rendering, not for how 12,000 pounds of house behaves at 65 miles an hour, or how a family actually uses 320 square feet every day. Here's what an engineer-informed layout actually looks like in practice. Heavy fixed elements, kitchen, bathroom, water systems positioned forward of or directly over the axle. The loft repositioned above or just behind that same axle zone instead of out over the tongue. Circulation built into the functional rooms themselves rather than surrendered to a dedicated hallway. And glazing and heavy cabinetry pulled back from the highest flex corners of the frame. Builds that follow this weight-forward, axle-centered approach don't cost meaningfully more than a standard build. The framing lumber is the same. The insulation is the same. The difference is almost entirely in where things are placed, which means this is a decision you make with a floor plan and a tape measure, not with a bigger budget. What it does change is towing stability, long-term structural fatigue, real usable square footage, and honestly, resale. Buyers who've done their homework are starting to ask trailer manufacturers and builders directly where the axle sits relative to the floor plan before they sign anything. If you're in the design phase right now, before you fall in love with a Pinterest layout, pull up your trailer's axle placement and ask one question. Where does the heaviest 40% of my home's weight actually sit relative to that line? If the honest answer is behind it, or worse, stacked in a loft, cantilevered out over the tongue, that's worth fixing on paper, where it costs you nothing, instead of on the road, where it costs you everything. So here's what I want to know. Did your build, or the one you're planning, put the loft over the tongue or over the axle? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and if this is the first time you've heard any of this, that tells you exactly how rare this information actually is in the tiny home space. Subscribe if you want more of this, the real engineering behind small space living, not just the finished photos. I'll see you in the next one.